Hi, my name is Karen Tucker, and I'm CEO and Board Director at the Churchill Club, and it's very nice to have you with us this evening, so thank you for coming out for this. What I anticipate will be a very lively and insightful discussion is in store for us called the Smart and Connected Home, and we're going to be looking at what can it be and how will we get there. To explore this topic, we have with us 5 very distinguished speakers, starting with Frank Gillett from Forrester Research, Larry Lewis from Intel, Matt Michael from the AllSeen Alliance and Qualcomm, Mike Soucie from Nest, a Google company, and of course our moderator, Robin Murdoch of Accenture. Thanks to all of you for being with us as well this evening. Very special thanks to Accenture for hosting us and also for their invaluable help in putting this program together. We really appreciate it, in particular Robin Murdoch and Julie Rosendahl. And I want to also thank Frank Gillett for his input as we talked about the framing and the content. A few words about Churchill Club for our new guests in the audience. We are a member-supported, nonprofit, independent forum devoted to encouraging innovation, economic growth, and social good. And we seek to fulfill this mission through the up to 40 or so programs that we curate each year where like minds can come together and hopefully will get some new ideas that they can move forth with. We respectfully ask our speakers not to pitch, but rather to think of themselves in a position to advance collective understanding and to build on insights and information that's readily available out there rather than repeating it. Next up, tomorrow night, we present the head of the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, Michelle K. Lee, the first woman in that role. And after that, Andy Palmer, the CEO of Aston Martin, on August 14, and yes, there will be cars on site. Drones on August 20, led by Robin Murdoch. And yes, there will be a drone demonstration. Artificial intelligence startups on August 26th. John Chen, CEO of BlackBerry, on August 28th. And then finally, on September 24th, the 5th annual Churchill's program, which was designed to inspire others by highlighting excellence in 4 areas that I'm sure all of us care about: innovation, leadership, collaboration, and social good. Past honorees there were Elon Musk, Vinod Khosla, the Mars rover Curiosity team, the Tesla Model S design team, and it is always a really remarkable evening. If you tweet tonight, please use the hashtag Churchill Club, and you will find other Twitter codes in your programs. And now it's time for Robin to take it away. Please welcome Robin Murdoch.
Thank you, Karen. Thanks, Karen, and thanks to the Churchill Club for organising this event on a great topic with such a great panel. So our discussion this evening is on the smart home and the opportunities in more and more of our home environment gets connected and internet addressable. We've seen lots of developments in 2015, both Apple and Google making their plays with HomeKit and Works with Nest, respectively. Companies like Intel and Qualcomm with technologies to accelerate the smart home and more broadly the IoT ecosystem. And we've even seen Tesla make its play with Powerwall home battery. I'm just back from Japan, and interesting home IoT thing I saw there was a $1,000 rice cooker that connects to the internet, which were apparently all the rage in Japan. So there's lots of topics to explore. We've got a great panel in Frank, Larry, Matt, and Mike. So let's get going. So first off, guys, could you introduce yourself and a bit about your background? Frank, we'll start with you.
So I'm Frank Gillett, Forrester Research. I've been there about 17 years as an analyst. I studied mechanical engineering and international relations as preparation and worked in the auto industry. And then I studied technology and policy and management at Sloan. So I got really overeducated and proceeded to have a really good time figuring out technologies and explaining them to people. And I've been focused on Internet of Things, including the smart home and the connected car for the last couple of years.
Larry Lewis, and I oversee strategy and what we call strategic business development, whatever that means, at the Internet of Things group for smart homes and building. So I have a little bit of a maybe broader vantage point than just the homes alone. But background is originally investment banking, a lot of time within digital home across various different efforts within digital media, and then also the smart home.
Hi everyone, my name is Matt Michael. I kind of wear three different hats tonight, or at least I'll speak from three different voices. One is I do work at Qualcomm. I am a senior director for the product management team there that does all of our software development on IoT-related projects. All of the contributions that we make to the AllSeen Alliance open source project, as well as internal software development. I'm also currently serving as the chair of the board of directors for the AllSeen Alliance, so I'll share a little bit more about kind of what we're doing. That will inform a lot of my views, I think, on where things are going. And then I think thirdly, and maybe most relevant for tonight, is I'm a homeowner, I'm a consumer like you guys. I'm doing a complete renovation in addition to my home. And I'm struggling with the question, how do I build a smart home, or can I build a smart home today? And what the heck does it look like? And I spend my evenings browsing through. I know the industry. I know what products are out there, and it's hard. It's really, really hard. The promise is great, but doing it today is tough. So I think this is a really relevant discussion, and it's a great topic to be here sharing with all you guys tonight.
Very good. Good evening, everyone. Mike Soucie. I joined Nest 8 months ago through the acquisition of my company, Revolve. We built a smart home automation hub that had 7 radios in it with the promise of unifying all the disparate devices in the home under a single application. We got acquired last October by Nest. I now head up our strategic partnerships, specifically for the Works with Nest program, which is our program that allows partners, iconic brands like Philips and Mercedes, to do meaningful integrations with our products. I'm happy to be here with you tonight.
Great. Well, I'd like to start with what might seem a fairly dumb question, which is, what is the smart home? How do you define the smart home, both personally, but also for your companies? Frank, I'll start with you.
So as analysts, I often take the sort of broad view and segment it. And so when I look at what people are calling smart home, I argue there is no such thing as the smart home or one smart home, because it is many different activities, and people are building those activities individually, and we're not going to see all those activities gel into one integrated thing. But fundamentally, what we're talking about is products with sensors that enable you to interact with them electronically or digitally, often via a mobile app, but not exclusively, and there's greater ways of interacting with that. But fundamentally, you have to enhance and improve the experience. The connected sensor is not the point itself.
So for us, and we were talking beforehand, that there's the prospects that it's a very homogeneous definition, or at least very similar. But from an Intel's perspective, the smart home is essentially a platform that works for you. It needs to be thinking. It needs to be kind of proactively, intelligently offering services to homeowners, to the end user. So I'm clearly biased, but I like to have as much intelligence as possible driving compute in the home. But we also think that ultimately that's where we have the opportunity to realize the full vision of what a smart home can be. And until we do that, there's many different avenues by which we have to solve different problems that we need to solve in order to get there. Until we do, we haven't really realized the full volume. And essentially, when all of us as consumers know what I'm talking about, that's when we know we'll have done our jobs.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. It's funny because I get asked that question all the time, and so I went to Google and Googled it. What is the definition of a smart home, right? And if you look at it, it says, connected devices like lights, locks, thermostats that can be remotely controlled with your phone, tablet, or PC. By definition, we've arrived at the smart home. But what that definition really lacks is, to what Larry was pointing out, the intelligence layer of making that smart. And that's why we tend at Nest to use the term connected home, because that's really the state where the industry is. We are connected products, and we are working towards creating at Nest a thoughtful home. So the thoughtful home is one that adds that intelligence layer, that understands your patterns, habitual pattern recognition, machine-to-machine learning, and understands through use and learning over time how to make your home feel more comfortable and save energy automatically, at least with the Nest thermostat. So it's just interesting by definition of what we call this. So.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I
Matt.
No
we've done
worries.
away.
I couldn't agree with Mike more. One of the first things I typically do is say, what isn't a smart home? And a connected home is not a smart home. Everything is connected today, but connectivity in and of itself doesn't mean anything. Right? It doesn't do anything for me. So I completely agree with Mike. I would take maybe a step further and say, when we talk about the home, this is very personal. This is me. This is my data, right? Everything in my home, sensors, everything being connected is producing data. It's mine, right? So it has to be something that makes my life easier and better using my data and what it knows about me. And to me, that's a simple definition of what a smart home is, and we're far from that.
Mike, we've been talking about the smart home for at least a decade, maybe more. What's different now?
I think, the idea of the smart home was really born out of the CD integrators, right? The luxury segment of the world that could afford somebody coming out, understanding your needs, doing a wired home automation system, right? And it's really at the pinnacle of the mobile technology, this personal device that we keep on our person 90% of the day, right? It's the first thing I pick up in the morning, last thing I put down, merged with great silicon vendors creating embedded wireless technologies that are very inexpensive. And I think what's born, though, is that there's an automatic idea that the cell phone should, while it drives our digital world, that it should also drive our physical world. And to a great extent, we should have that control. But I think, again, we're reliant on it becomes a glorified remote control when you have 7 or 10 or 15 different apps. And is that really easier than getting up and turning on a switch? Or, so it doesn't necessarily make life easier. So I think, again, it's been both a transition from where the industry was 15, 30 years ago, all the way to having the pinnacle of technology allowing this to occur. And then there's a rush to get products connected. But at Nest, we always say, what problem are we solving? Just because you can connect it, should you? It's because I think there's a lot of gratuitous use cases coming out. It just doesn't make sense.
That's a great lead into my next question, which is one of, where's the value going to be? I mean, we've seen, obviously there's money in selling devices at the moment. But,
right.
Frank, where's the value in the smart home?
So one of the things that was interesting when Google bought Nest is everyone said, oh, now my thermostat's going to advertise to me. And that, to my mind, showed sort of the real lack of understanding. Because when you look at the value of advertising to us as individuals, whether it's through Google or Facebook or some others, it's pretty low amount of revenue per person or household. And when you look at all the other revenues flowing through the households already that could be enhanced with connected or smart or thoughtful technologies, to my mind, that's where the value is going to be. It's in transforming and enhancing those relationships. But if you look at the sources of revenue, the food industry, $600 or $700 billion flowing through our kitchens. If you look at homeowners insurance, $77 billion or something like that flowing through households. There's these tens of billions of dollars, and when you look at it from the point of view of each household, it's thousands of dollars, in aggregate over $10,000 probably easily per household. That's a lot more money than the advertising value. And so what I find intriguing are the kind of partnership deals you see where, such as around the recent Nest Protect, where the insurance companies and the device maker get together in some combined interest. And you see that around electrical utilities. You don't see it yet in the kitchen, where I think we will see it. Nobody's bought the drop kitchen scale yet and turned that into something. So it's these economic models that need to get worked out. But, for example, the broadband economic model, I see no synergy between, say, the alarm company guys or the broadband internet guys and other activities in the home. So I see a bunch of independent relationships and revenue flows that will get reconfigured and remade, but not based on advertising. And I'm curious where we're going to go with this, but that's my take to start us off.
You said it very well, right, of where the value is. And again, Nest approaches both the design of our products, of what problem we're solving, and also as it relates to the Works with Nest program and the strategic partnerships that I head up. It's getting together with companies that already have a really great product that's providing value in itself, and then figuring out if it makes sense, because sometimes it doesn't, to do an integration together. And we kind of focus on themes, and it's really, obviously, the thermostat is around comfort and energy savings. So it'll pay for itself over time, right? And it'll keep you comfortable automatically. But when we start looking at integration, so we have a deal with utility companies, energy providers, 30 different utilities across the company. And we have a program called Rush Hour Rewards. It's essentially a demand response program. When energy prices are high because of the demand on the grid is high, the utility will send a signal down to the thermostat. And not only can Nest take action on behalf of the consumer, but so will our partners. So for instance, if hot summer day tomorrow in Texas, 4 o'clock, energy prices are going to skyrocket till 8 p.m., we'll take that signal and we'll pre-cool the home at 2 in the afternoon. But not only that, but our partners can tap into that. So big-ass fans will run the fan during that energy event to circulate the air, so it feels cooler. Whirlpool has jumped on. They can do 2 things, either delay the wash cycle completely until 8 p.m., or do a spin cycle in eco mode. So it's less RPMs, reducing, again, energy consumption. And there's just these meaningful, thoughtful kind of integrations. At least that's how Nest looks for partnerships when we're bringing people in, that just work on behalf of the consumer. They don't have to figure it out for themselves. And I think that's what when we're talking about intelligent.
Maybe Matt and then Larry. Your companies obviously are coming at it from a very different sort of ecosystem-led way. You don't have finished product necessarily yourselves. Yeah, how's Qualcomm looking at the space from a value perspective?
Well, obviously connectivity is important, right? So there's some technology enablers that you need before you can really build economic value in IoT as a whole, but smart home is one vertical segment of IoT. And so we need to connect devices first. And of course, that's an area where Qualcomm has a bunch of expertise. And the more devices that are connected, the better it is as a company and a business. But those are really technology enablers. So we need to solve issues with connectivity. There's a lot of different radio technologies out there. Each has its own set of pros and cons, right? So we need to address that. And those are all specific to the different business models that you can enable with the different technologies. We need to address security and safety, and that really starts at the very edge device. And so there's a tie-in to silicon there. We need to protect things all the way from the edge device, and even above the edge device, the application on the edge device. So it needs to start there and go all the way out to the application, whether it's in the cloud or somewhere else in the local network. So we need to solve those problems. Above it, though, and beyond it, and this is kind of my AllSeen Alliance now view, is that interoperability is fundamental, because none of us go out and buy a connected home. I'm trying to build one, and I'm having a hard time. Most of us are going to build our smart connected homes a device at a time, a piece at a time. Yep. And I love the examples that you give, because they're very concrete examples of value, and we can all wrap our head around it.
Yep.
But I think if we look 3 years ahead or 5 years ahead, none of us can imagine what it will be, right? We just don't know. And because I come from the mobile space, and that's Qualcomm's heritage, let me just explain a little bit why really briefly. 10 years ago, a 2G phone, we used it for text and voice, right? And then this concept of a feature phone came along. And a feature phone, better hardware, it had maybe GPS and some sensors, and maybe you had a few cool applications on it that you could use. But those applications ran on one model from one manufacturer, and there was no interoperability. And then the iPhone came along, and there were attempts before the iPhone, but the iPhone came along, and iOS sat on top of that same hardware and exposed all of the functionality as a set of APIs, and it opened up the developer ecosystem. And developers thought of things that I'm fairly confident nobody ever imagined. My phone became a flute. It had a touch screen. It had a speaker. It had a microphone. And a developer said, I can mash that together and make it a flute, right? Or I can make it a heart rate monitor. I can do all of these things. And that's the creative power that comes from an ecosystem. So now let's apply that same model to the smart connected home. By bringing together device manufacturers, right, and mashing these things up, you can create value, right? I can lower my energy costs. There's a lot of different things you can do. If all of these devices that are connected are interoperable and they're exposing that functionality onto the network as a set of APIs, the types of applications that will be built on that are amazing, but more importantly than the applications, the services that will be offered, right? My healthcare will be improved if all of my devices are connected, and that's tied to my medical service provider, right? You can imagine what that is. Predictive analytics and predictive maintenance on my on my appliances and my goods. If I can know things are going to break before they break and I can get them serviced, that's huge. I don't want to be in the middle of summer. It's 105 degrees. It's a long weekend, and my air conditioner goes out, and I have to wait 5 days. I'd rather know that in advance and solve it. So the connected home is about data. in what you do with data. And you can build services and sell services and offer value using that data.
Larry,
Yeah, I mean,
Intel's take.
Intel has the history of seeing that the value of the apps, the services, and the features that come as you create these platforms overwhelm and in amazing ways that you can't foresee. That like none of us have the vision to see what is potentially there. Strategically, we look at all of the opportunities to create value, create features and capabilities, but also business model innovation, and it's tied into what Nest is doing with the energy companies. If you expand your definition of advertising, how valuable is it to a local power company that at long last, demand response has been around for a long time. They've tried for a very long time to get consumers to adopt it, to kind of embrace it. Now all of a sudden I have this valuable capability that I can advertise, co-brand along with a cool product called Nest. All of a sudden the consumer's saying, wow, that's a really cool feature. Yeah, that is something that's valuable, as opposed to I'm Southern California Edison or PG&E showing up at the doorstep saying, hey, we're here to help, right? We want to know what's going on in your home. These are examples of where there's new business models and there's really great opportunities to innovate. On top of platforms, Qualcomm, Intel are bringing out into the system. And we have to get through the messy process of interoperability in order to get to that, in order to expand that universe of players.
So you mentioned adoption. Mike, Nest obviously took on a really hard problem space. You had to fit it to your home. Now, how are you guys thinking about pushing much broader adoption of a technology like Nest? Maybe less so Dropcam because it's kind of over the top. But how are you guys thinking about really driving? There's probably a billion connected homes soon out there. How are you going to get into as many of them as possible?
So we have a couple of different thoughts on that. I think first we acknowledge that for the most part, this has to date been an early adopter, mostly tech early adopter market. And I think this is why we created the Works with Nest Partner Program. And again, we have like 9,000 developers that signed up. We highlight about 60 on our site that have meaningful integrations, right? And I think, I wasn't sure if it was Matt or Larry, but one of you said that people aren't going out and buying $1,500 worth of gear at Target, bringing it home saying, I'm going to build out my smart home, right? They're buying individual point devices that had value to their life for that particular need or want. And we call that an entry point. So whether it's with a Nest or maybe it's a Belkin Wemo or another product that people are buying, the concept of partnering with them to understand that if that's a good quality experience that they have with that first entry point product, they're probably going to seek out the next one and begin to build out that infrastructure that will begin to form the smart connected home or eventually, hopefully, the thoughtful home from our perspective. So I think partnering and understanding where the entry points are. And there's usually some themes. There's kind of the top 5 or 10 around lights, locks, or access points, garage door opener locks, thermostats, around comfort, safety with the Nest Protect. So certainly we're tackling some of those, and then our partner companies are tackling like the top 5 or 10. And so those are obvious to the consumer. And so let's build great integrations around those, because once they have one point product and the other, it's not about them working separately. The magic is now in the connection. And then having a great experience with 2 products that just work by themselves, you don't have to worry about it. So
Mike mentioned it was really the early adopters. I mean, in your research, Frank, what are you seeing?
Yeah, so what we see in a couple of different surveys last year is that about 13% of U.S. Adults who use the internet regularly, that is, most adults, there's a few who don't, about 13% of them report using one or more connected or remotely controlled digitally device. So crudely speaking, about 13% of households have started this one thing at a time adoption. And what's interesting is then when you look under the covers of those 13%, it's okay, how many have had the second or the third? It's like 2%. So we're really, really early on that curve of people doing that. And if you flip it around and say how many people have a home network, almost all of them have a home network. That's a prerequisite here. And when you ask, well, how many devices do they have on the network, it turns out they've got 5 or 6 on average. Some of them with smart TVs or game consoles. Laptops are very common. Interestingly, not everyone's connecting their smartphone to the network, but they are connecting the tablet to the network. because if the smartphone works at home, why bother connecting to the Wi-Fi, right? It's not a natural thing to a non-geek who's not in Silicon Valley. So we see the precursor is there, and then we look at a different thing, which is what we call the mobile mind shift, which is the change in behavior and expectations that happens as you get deeper and deeper into using the smartphone. And in the United States, we think 10 to 20% of adults have flipped into the mode of expecting they can solve a problem in their moment of need in context, that when they pull out the phone or go to the PC, the service, the experience will already be tuned into what they're doing, what's going on, and sort of get them halfway to solving the problem. So about 10 to 20% of the adults are into this transition to that mindset, the mindset that I call when they go to buy something new, is there an app for that? Right? You pull out your phone and you think, okay, I'm either going to be able to go to a website or pull out an app and just deal with this. So we're still really, really early in terms of the population and their expectations. And in fact, in the qualitative interviews that we've done, we have a panel and we ask them, instead of ticking the boxes in the survey, like give us phrases, there's still a lot of skepticism for value. Because what they tell us is, well, I don't want to pay anything extra, and I want to make sure it's really secure. And so there's a concern that, well, why on earth would I do that when I can just use a key? I'm still used to that. It's still familiar.
So I've just built a new home and it's fully connected. But what I'm struck
For
by...
you.
Yeah, it's here's what I'm struck by. And actually I want to ask
So you're
this...
connected but not yet smart, is that it?
Very true.
Oh, okay.
What I want to ask Matt, actually, is one of the things about my home is I've got a lot of systems in my home that are connected but don't speak to each other. They're not interoperable. But actually beyond that, a lot of the companies providing those services, particularly the higher-end services like security, heating, etc., don't really have a vested interest in making it interoperable, at least as I can see it at the moment. So, you have your alliance. How do you incent people to interoperate who maybe actually have a business model that doesn't make sense for them to be interoperating?
So I think this is really where we start talking about differentiation between product and services, right? And so the AllSeen Alliance, for those of you who don't know, is a collaborative open source project. It's open to anybody to come in. It's open source code. And the thought is that, look, a connected home is bigger than any one company. There's no one company that can enable every product, every segment, and sell into it from every brand. And we know as consumers, right? I know how I shop. Sometimes it's value-based. Sometimes it's brand-based, whatever it is at the moment. So in order for the really connected home to come together, I need to have choice, right? And I need to go out and buy stuff and know that when I bring it home, it's actually going to work. I need to have confidence in that, right? So at a certain level, that interoperability, that connectivity, that communication, that common language, if you will, that they all need to speak, there's a vested interest for all manufacturers to enable their products to speak that common language. Because if they don't, everybody loses. The connected home, the smart home, it doesn't ever get realized. People take home, I love when you use the word experience, because that's exactly right. You build experiences. And we go from 13% on the first device to 2% on the second device because experiences are poor and selection and choice is poor. So the AllSeen Alliance, as an open source project, is companies coming together, and guess what? Almost all of them individually have tried to build a vertical ecosystem and failed because consumers aren't that brand loyal in most cases. So I think they've come together and said, look, at a common interoperability communication discovery layer, we should all be working together at that level. Then what we do is we find ways to deliver differentiated experiences on top of that common communication layer. And we do that with services, and there's a lot of things that we can do with very creative stuff like Nest is doing with partnerships and product functionality that you then go out and compete in the market. But they've all come to the same conclusion that without that level of interoperability, it's just never going to happen.
Well, let me be provocative here. I don't think we'll ever be that fully interoperable because there are just so many different domains in the home that I don't think that, the kitchen appliances are going to need to talk to the thermostat. I can't think of a good reason to do that. And so what I would argue is we're going to see interop in clusters or around activities within the home, but not across the entire home. And I'm interested in a dialogue about this because the idea that we're going to wait until all this stuff works together means we're waiting a long time based on the behavior in the marketplace I see right now. So to me, there's natural clusters in what I call the background activities, the boring but important stuff like safety and comfort. So there's a couple of clusters. There's like 6 activities there, and they over time evolve and clump. But when you look at the foreground, the entertaining stuff, like caregiving within the family, or the food prep, or the gardening, I'm hard-pressed to argue that there's a lot of need for interop and communications there. So help me out with that.
Mike, that's definitely a question aimed at you.
Matt said it really well, this is a new frontier, and it will play itself out to use cases that we can't imagine. And it really relies on the developer community, manufacturers, companies getting together, and consumers giving feedback on what they want. So we could certainly test out ideas and see what useful and meaningful integrations are going to drive that. But it's funny, we all have a different need in our mind of how a connected or connected appliances should and could work together. So, and again, we kind of look at this as an evolutionary process, right? We just described how consumers are adopting products one at a time. Then the next is, and we found this at Revolve when I was at Revolve, and we could see exactly what products they added when and how many. And at least at Revolve customers, they got to a point when they had 3 to 4 products, and when they felt that pain point of, wait a minute, I've got 4 different apps, 5 different apps. Why do I have that? Why can't I consolidate them? Why can't they talk with one another? But it took 4 apps or 4 different devices for them to experience that pain. And then once they did, what was interesting is within 8 weeks, typically they'd scale to 10 devices in the home. I mean, this was an interesting statistic of that once they saw when connected devices can talk with one another, and then they could set up actions, right? So for instance, when I go to bed at night, there's usually 4 or 5 different things I do, right? I lock the door, turn off the lights, set the thermostat back, take other actions around. And so you can automate around those 4 or 5 different products. So the consumer begins to say, wow, I'm going to add that device for this different purpose. And so they build out the network. So, yeah.
Kind of, though. It's a function of time as well. Like, we tend to get breathless, and this is happening, this is going to happen next year.
And it always happens slower than we think.
It really does. And we've seen this before in other industries, in other segments. I think the long game is very similar to what we've seen before.
Right.
I think the potential that comes from all of those different clusters, and that's a cool way to look at it, different clusters working together remains to be seen. And it'll take longer than most people are willing to wait in our industry.
Yeah.
A lot of people will move on to the next thing.
So we talk about interoperability, and clearly there's lots of movement in the area. Are we seeing a coalescing around a certain set of standards? Let's talk about connectivity, wireless connectivity. What are we seeing there? Maybe start with you.
Matt?
Okay.
There's a couple of technologies. Obviously, Wi-Fi is the technology that's being integrated across all device segments and categories. So Wi-Fi is there. The cost has come down, which has been a critical part of enabling a lot of these connected devices today.
Power's problem.
Well, and so there's one technology, right, Wi-Fi, but we've got a host of other radio technologies, and I think the market will continue to evolve down that path because they serve different needs, right? And there isn't, at least in the foreseeable future, a one-size-fits-all, right? When you start really talking, let's talk 5-10 years from now when we start talking about a connected home, going beyond the devices that we buy as consumer devices to sensors and things in the home, that very low power, right? Very long life. Some of them may even be battery powered, right? These are devices that get deployed 10 years, maybe they're going to be out there, maybe longer, right? And so you need different radio technologies that can support the different use cases that these products are going to drive.
Matt, what about the role of Bluetooth? How does that sort of play into home IoT?
I think Bluetooth fits a need, right? It's got a place today. It's certainly in the market. There's a lot of use cases that are well served. They don't maybe have high data rate. They've got power constraints. They don't have range requirements. So I think what you're going to see is in these homes, you're going to find products that really can work in application layers and service layers that are agnostic to the underlying radio layer, and they have to run across those various technologies.
Can I ask Mike, are there wireless standards that are going away that we're not using as much?
I would say yes, and it's slow. I think, we kind of looked at it at Revolve, right? You have Zigbee, Z-Wave, 433, and then proprietary like Lutron kind of has an offshoot of that. 900 in certain instances for meter reading because of the range. Insteon has their own. then you have Bluetooth, and you have Wi-Fi, right? Like, and each one of those serves a particular need and purpose for that manufacturer, and it works really well. I think what we are starting to see, though, and then Thread, which Nest was a co-founder of the Nest Thread organization. So we're kind of narrowing it down to Wi-Fi being broadband and Thread for device-to-device communication in the home are the primary protocols that Nest is betting on. And sorry, go ahead.
Well, I just want to pop it up. I feel like Bluetooth for the near term is the lowest common denominator for making setup drop dead simple.
That's right.
And Thread is sort of above the radio. So because the smartphone is still sort of the setup instrument, until we crack that and have a consistent enough, say, voice interface in the home that I think we're many years away from, I can't see Bluetooth going away, but the question is how strategic is the role? I mean, I can't tell you how annoyed I am with my Parrot plant sensor that I have to walk by and stand there with my phone to get it to like connect over Bluetooth and do the update.
You hit the nail right on the head. August Lock, right? Great lock, Bluetooth. What do they have to do? Come out with August Connect, which is what? A bridge.
A Bluetooth bridge to
Right.
get you on IP network.
Right. Again, because of limitations, right?
So can you
Range.
just describe what this August bridge is? Because it's
Yeah, I'm sorry. So August Lock, right, the retrofit deadbolt lock, they came out with a Bluetooth version, right? Or it is a Bluetooth version when they came out. And it's got range issue because that's what Bluetooth has is range issue.
But it's secure because it's not connected to the internet.
Well, that's true. But their users want and requested remote connectivity, right? When I'm at the office, somebody comes knocking, I can't unlock the door if I know them, right? So what do they do? Again, and that's what we're finding is bridges and gateways having to solve the interoperability for remote control is a primary driver.
It's a small unit that plugs
Oh, I'm
into
sorry,
your
yeah.
socket by your lock.
Yeah,
That's exactly right.
It's within 30 feet, and it can talk over Bluetooth.
A little
to
wall
lock.
wart that you stick in your outlet socket that has a Wi-Fi radio and a Bluetooth chip in it, right?
Yeah, so it's bridging from Wi-Fi to Bluetooth.
Exactly.
So in the past year, we've seen HomeKit works with Nest. How are these? I mean, it seems like there's a whole set of new platforms opening up. Are these going to talk to each other? Maybe Matt, I'll ask you.
I think the interesting thing is if you go and talk to a lot of what's happening in the industry, we're all saying we want the same thing, right? We're all taking different paths to try and get to the same place, which is interoperability, right? So I believe over the coming years, you're going to see a consolidation in some of the various platforms, and they're going to come together. And it's in all of our best interest to make that happen. It's in the best interest of the consumer. It's in the best interest of industry. It's in the best interest of everybody. It takes time. We all know that. And I think we're all aggressively working to make that happen as quickly as we can. Until then, we're going to have to bridge things. There's just no simple way around it, right? There's a lot of different products out there. And even once we bring some of these things together, we're still going to have to deal with existing products that manufacturers have in their portfolios that they have to support, that they have fielded. And so there's going to be
legacy already in the field stuff, yeah.
There's no way around it.
Yeah, I mean, industry's dealing with 20-year legacy, and I feel like in the home we're going to be dealing with a 10-year tail minimum.
Yeah. Now, in the home, the important part though is how do we make it simple, right? Because if we tie this all back to experience, most homes, and this is probably a uniquely qualified audience, if you will, can manage their network, right? And they understand it well enough to manage it reasonably. Most homes don't have that. So we have to deal with different standards and different radio technologies and bringing all these platforms together and legacy stuff that's fielded, and it all has to just work. And that's really the hard part, right? A lot of this, the technology we can bring together, but if we don't make the user experience simple and easy and available to everybody, it's never going to be a widely adopted, mass deployed technology because we don't have, most of us don't have CIOs at home.
With each new market, there's always this time where the horizontal players are trying to determine on what basis are they going to compete. And it's a natural evolution of each of these different markets, and this one will work itself out as well. Each of the players will determine, okay, where in the value chain are they going to compete, and there's a little bit of a jump ball. Once we get past it, then we'll be moving in, I think, a much more cohesive, lockstep fashion, because no one's going to realize value if we're creating a bunch of walled gardens around, products. And we meet with companies all the time that are, we support 20 devices, we support 50 devices, we support 60 devices. That doesn't support the promise that we're making to the industry. And I don't think anybody will make substantial money in this market if it stays that way.
So Frank, where will the control reside for the smart home? I mean, everyone's expecting Apple to release something at some point in the TV space. Obviously Nest got their approach. Where's the centralized control point going to be? Does there need to be a centralized control point?
Well, regardless of what's true technically or what the industry wants or thinks, I think the smartphone is going to be the practical control point, because that's the instrument that the customer pulls out in order to figure out how to deal with this. And in some cases, in technologies and products, that's actually the locus of interoperability is app-to-app communication. And it's clunky, but you can make it work. And that's effectively kind of what HomeKit is, although HomeKit, if we can infer correctly from the tea leaves we can read at Apple, it's kind of like reading the old Kremlin or trying to read Beijing today. What we're going to see is Apple TV acting as an iPhone that stays home and orchestrates via HomeKit interop among the different apps. And that's a bit of a different approach than what we see. I don't think of that as quite the same as the hub idea, but it effectively accomplishes the same thing. But from the point of view of the customer, that's the natural thing that they're going to be doing. And in fact, I would argue, again, we're going to see sort of clusters of this. I don't think my toothbrush needs to talk to my bathroom scale. I mean, they're both about my health, and maybe I want a health app that sort of gives me a total, how well am I taking care of my health during the day, and did I eat my broccoli and all that stuff. But the health app so far isn't doing very well for Apple in terms of putting together information about us, and maybe they'll get it figured out. So, I mean, the honest answer is sort of the smartphone, but eventually, I think things that have to appear in multiple places through the home are natural platforms, and so the places I'm looking at are the router that comes from your broadband provider, things that attach to your television set, so the set-top box, and things that are dumb today and are getting smart, like your smoke detector or your thermostat or your wall outlets or your wall switches, is if those get smart and then they become an interesting sort of home network, and then that can be bridged into something that can touch from a communications level, but not necessarily a common experience.
So, Michael, I want to ask a question sort of related to interoperability, but sort of absolutely critical, and that's identity. So if you think about identity in the smart home, you've got your home identity, you've got your individual identity. Maybe to bring it alive with a couple of examples. If you use a Sonos system, a home sound system, there is no identity attached to that. It's just if you're on the network, you're authenticated on the network that the Sonos system sits on, suddenly you can control the music. It's the same with Wemo, actually, in terms of setup. But how do we deal with kind of the fact that there are multiple people who should be able to control the smart home, yet at the moment it doesn't feel like anyone's really addressing that?
I think so. Nest and the thermostat, we start with the home structure state, right? And it's really around home and away. Home and away is occupancy, vacancy, because you can make many, many different actions or create actions on behalf of the consumer based on those two states of the home. Whether I'm away, I want actions on many different product levels to occur, and when I'm home, I want many different. So that's a macro look. And to your point, the point I'm trying to make is that we start with the macro. We start with the home structure, and over time, with more products in the home, more devices, more data that's also collected at some level, we'll get to a micro level. And that's when you get into personalizations, preferences, micro-location in the home. And that can only occur when you have more and more nodes. So I use a simple example. If you have one Nest thermostat and you install it down a hallway, and we use occupancy sensing to understand whether you're home and away, sometimes it'll take 2 hours for you to be away from the home, or at least on our version 1 of the thermostat, before the thermostat would switch it to away. And we'd get calls, and they're like, what's going on? It's not working. It's like, we don't want to guess wrong. And because you're only walking in front of this one sensor down a hallway, but I'll tell you, if you have door contact sensors, if you have multiple thermostats, if you have a Nest Protect, and all of a sudden...
Or door lock state.
Yeah, exactly, right? And more motion detected or detectors in the home, we can become more accurate and know within minutes now of whether you can actually, whether the home is occupied or vacant. So it's about this robust mesh network of devices that's going to help feed the experience to create a true, better experience.
That's kind of where the toothbrush thing comes in, because now I know it's around bedtime. There's This is your pattern of behavior. This is where you don't need your toothbrush connected to your shower per se, but if you're taking a holistic view of the consumer and their behavior within their home in a non-creepy way.
So the handle would start glowing, or telling me it's time to brush my teeth?
Or your TV clicks on to your bedtime routine.
The fall asleep program, okay.
Matt, in your work, how are you looking at identity? And I suppose there's personal identity, but there's also device identity. How's that working with, particularly around sort of the interoperability?
Well, I tend to agree with Frank. I think for that reason alone, that the smartphone is the most personal thing most of us carry, right? More than anything. I can lose my work laptop. I know the company worries about that, and I worry about it some. But if I lose my phone, oh my God, right? What do people know about me? What access to my information they have? I've got to go change everything. So I think the phone, it is almost our digital identity, right? I mean, it goes with us everywhere we go. It knows everything we do. We interact with it. We pull it out for everything. We use it for everything. We have an expectation that it already knows me, and it presents information to me that's relevant to me, right? So I think that's our digital identity already for most of us today. And I think that having that device, being able to interact and interoperate with the other devices around me is how we go from where you are today to that very personalized home, because now it knows who I am. It really knows who I am.
So I have to interject, though, because that breaks down in the home. And I say that it's great when I'm mobile in GPS, but when I'm in my home, I'm charging it somewhere else. It's not always on me in the home. I'm in my bedroom. It's downstairs.
Wife doesn't carry hers around at all.
Right.
I'm the nut
I mean,
job.
I totally understand.
It's true, but it is the device that knows me and my
Agreed.
preferences and my likes. And if you're running a common protocol and communication across it, and it's connected right when it walks into your home, the other devices, they now know that I'm home.
Sure.
And my Nest thermostat knows exactly what I nappy like, not what the home likes. And you're starting at the right place. And I agree. I think you said a key point is that you can't get it wrong, right? We have no patience for technology that makes mistakes. As humans, I don't want my thermostat or whatever it is that's connected, doing things for me that I don't want it to do, right? So we have to err on the side of caution, and you have to wait 2 hours to be sure, because you'll get far more calls from angry customers if it's like, my thing is turned off, I'm sitting right there, what the heck's going on? So by having my phone there, presence, preference, a lot of things that tell the other connected devices around me what they should be doing and how they should be behaving.
But do you look at it as like biased? We look at the phone as being like the preferred user interface to the cloud. Like Google, my phone doesn't know or anticipate what I'm putting into Google Maps. Google does back in the cloud, monitoring and keeping track of who I am and what my identity is. Do you look at it as the phone knows me, or is it the services connected in the background that knows you?
It's a mix of both, for sure. But the phones, as we talk about this big connected internet, more and more things move to the edge, right? And there's a lot of intelligence at the edge. I mean, we all know our phones today are more powerful than our computers from 5-10 years ago, right? And the edge devices that are being deployed, the Nest thermostat, whatever it may be, there's more and more intelligence there. So there's more and more of that at the edge, and I think it's certainly a mix. And a lot of the services, and this is as much about services as it is about hardware, right? But there's a lot of that that's in the device itself, right? And we give that information to the device because we trust it, because I hold it. It's mine.
Frank, let's talk about security briefly. I mean, obviously, the other side of identity is security, and with all of this, our home being connected online, there's a huge threat envelope opening up. I mean, how should we be thinking about security of the smart home?
Well, one of the things I've realized is that any of the technologies that have been introduced have security issues. I mean, the very first lock that was introduced with a conventional mechanical key, you can still steal that and then get in, or you can hack your way into a physical key. So one of the things is getting people to realize, well, yeah, there are some new aspects to threat, but a lot of this is still the old familiar one of worrying about physical theft and access. It's an interesting connection to what we were just talking about identity, because I've had some great conversations with people in the industry about ensuring accurate identification of the devices in our home and enumerating the devices. It was really intriguing to see your sort of geeky app that shows all the things on the network in your new home, and I mean to ask you afterwards about that, but you're having to run your own little Raspberry Pi thing to do that today. But the point here is that an anchor point to understanding sort of security in the aggregate of the smart home is going to be, in fact, understanding all the devices and a map to the interoperability among them, right? If you can jump from one to another. So the security inevitably is always going to be a bit of a step behind until we sort this out. Honestly, the guys at Electric Imp were really intriguing because they and others are designing so that you cannot address a device inbound. It only polls outbound to check in at a cloud service. But even that, you can try to step in front of the cloud service and misdirect it. So honestly, I think there are a lot of good things that are being done about security in the smart home. But as with every other technology that I've seen prior to the digital stuff, there are inevitably ways to hack it. And so I don't see any way to do it other than deal with the fact that what we're trying to do is mitigate large disasters because we're still going to get the point ones here and there.
So, Mike, let me ask you about sort of the role of the cloud relative to the smart home. Obviously, the two big products for you, Dropcam requires the cloud, doesn't really work without the cloud. Nest works without the cloud if need be. How are you guys thinking about that trade-off between the compute and power in the home and the cloud itself?
Yeah, I think to your point, right, there's certain products that just need to work in the home without connectivity. Thermostat is one, Nest Protect, certainly Nest Cam is one that is reliant on that because that's where the value lies. And this kind of piggybacks on what we were just talking about as phone identity. And I think Nest takes a little bit different approach. We call it the Nest Learning Thermostat with the intent that we're anticipating your behavior, understanding it, creating an auto schedule so you don't have to use the phone. When people don't use the phone, that's actually a win for us, which means our technology is working on behalf of the consumer and they don't have to do anything. And so that's really our vision, is to create that thoughtful experience where not only our products but our partner products are able to do that. And so, sorry, I got lost off track on that point. Sorry.
I suppose what can the cloud do for us?
Oh, the cloud.
What can you do locally?
Yeah. Sorry, I just needed a reminder.
I suppose more than that, as you look at kind of the next 5 years, the devices are either going to get ever more powerful or just consume hardly any power at all, and the cloud's going to get ever more powerful. And the bit in the middle, the connectivity, is probably going to be your weak link. So how is that going to evolve?
So the cloud is big when it comes to the intelligence aspect. So Nest is really invested heavily on the algorithm side of data analytics, machine-to-machine learning, habitual pattern recognition, so we can create that experience without the phone. To that point, where does the logic lie? And I think it's shared at some level, right? It's not going to be all local, and it's not all going to be in the cloud. So obviously that communication layer. But again, you need devices to be able to, we were talking about this earlier, right? Is it distributed? I mean, it's still being worked out, and the answer isn't written. But the cloud plays a major role, at least in the benefits and the experiences that will be gained back to the consumer for sure.
And it'll evolve. It'll evolve over time, right?
From an Intel perspective, you kind of benefit from
either. Yeah,
so how are you guys thinking about it?
So it'll evolve, and I think depending upon the service, I mean, more than likely, we would say it'll start in the cloud, it'll distribute down. The logical progression is the level of intelligence stays in the cloud for a period of time until you determine, okay, this is the kind of stable relationships that we can kind of identify. Then you start pushing it down into the local level, right? There's some. The thermostat is an example. If you lose connectivity to the cloud, you don't want your thermostat to stop working. So there's some basic level functionality that needs to be local, but we think it's going to ebb and flow. It's going to go back and forth, and it's going to be use case specific. The general flow will be cloud to local, though, because most of the cool stuff that you can come up with is taking a mass amount of data and leveraging the connectivity, but not the intelligence, back in the cloud, figuring out what you should or could be doing, and then pushing it back down and saying, hey, look, there's some decisions that should be made locally, and I'm going to push that intelligence down as appropriate.
I mean, I suppose probably a good example, maybe Frank can ask you this, a home security system with a bunch of HD cameras, if all of that is being pushed to the cloud, that's going to absolutely swamp your broadband connection. So how should we think about that? I mean, am I going to need to have stuff stored locally? When's stuff going to move to the cloud? And if the value is in the algorithms and machine learning in the cloud, how the hell does it get to the cloud?
So if you blindly dump all the data to the cloud and don't have any local sense, then yeah, you would swamp the bandwidth. So I don't think we're going to see that. The simple way that you see that handled today is, when nothing is happening, you don't ship the video out. So you only ship out the video when something interesting is happening, as opposed to trying to have 24-hour replay. But then it gets even more interesting when you look at some of the imaging technology from a company like Apical, which can recognize whether there are humans in the scene or not. It recognizes behavior and activities and can filter for that. And what's even more interesting is it can abstract those behaviors and details from video and ship only that information out, a wireframe of the individual, a direction that they're looking. And so I think we're going to see that kind of sort of intelligent local processing helping us sort out when and how to do stuff local, when to ship it out. And I think you're going to see even, locally based on culture, whether in fact you have an SD card in the camera storing the video locally rather than having it shipped out. And you'll see features, as you see on ArcSoft SimplyCam, that says if you see such and such a face, stop recording. So there's a bunch of innovations that I'm seeing that will address this issue of not just saturating the bandwidth, but in fact using it intelligently to accomplish a goal as opposed to just doing what's possible.
So that's one piece of it, and I think we firmly believe there's a balance between cloud and proximity. I don't think you can have that discussion, though, without talking about security. And it's really fundamental because, again, my smart home, it knows things about me. All of that information, whether it could be supported and pushed out, doesn't necessarily need to be. And I, as a consumer, don't really want it to be, right? So there needs to be a very, very rigid security framework that I can trust that allows me to control those things as a consumer. Because consumers, I think we're all becoming more and more aware of breaches and privacy. So privacy and security are two different things, right? But breaches in these things. And that's happening and becoming very visible and public with really very few smart connected homes, right? So you can imagine when I start taking this and deploying it, and if connectivity costs come down and everything has connectivity in it, not every manufacturer understands security, right? So I go buy a $10 product. It's great. I plug it into my outlet on my wall, and I've now exposed my entire network. I punched a hole through the firewall if it goes directly to the cloud, and I expose things. So we have to balance between what stays in the proximal environment, and then when things need to either go out or come inbound for remote access and things that we know consumers want and value, that it's done in a secure and managed way. And security is tough. Security is a black box, right? I mean, I don't know if there's any security experts here. It's tough stuff. Now we have to make it something that the consumer can manage on their own and do it reliably. So it's a very complex dynamic.
Okay, final question for each of you. We're sitting here 5 years from now. What are the topics? What's my smart home able to do 5 years from now that will amaze me that I can't do today? Start with you, Frank.
So I think the thing we're beginning to get a glimmer of is the notion of an interface other than the black slab of glass. And so the voice interfaces, for example, that we see around Amazon Echo, around the Ubi, the not known product that preceded the Amazon Echo by more than a year, I think will be quite common by then. And I think we'll also be into things like the Jibbo robot as a bit more of a humanistic interaction interface than just a voice device. And I think with that, we are going to see around those same devices the ability to gesture in the air, although I'm unclear how much that will sort of be mainstream. Voice is so much easier than cool gestures. But that's my vote.
Sorry. I do think that within 5 years, that's the time horizon, what you'll start to see is actually some of these clusters, on your term, actually working together and creating meaningful services. I think within that time frame, that will happen. And then I do think that the advances that a lot of companies are making with natural language processing is going to expand our definition of user interface.
Yeah. I tend to agree. I would hope or would like to think that in 5 years, I will be able to interact with my home without interacting with my home. right? Kind of what you're saying. It will just act on behalf of me because it knows me. I think we're much further away from that. That's kind of the goal. I think we collectively on this panel and everybody sitting in the room, we have a lot of work to do to solve the underlying enablers. We all talk about interoperability. We all talk about security. There's a lot of work that we have to do here to solve those problems, and that's what's going to drive this. And I think realistically, it's going to be a collaborative effort. If we're not doing it collaboratively, we're not going to get there. So 5 years from now, if we don't really work together, we may not be in a much different state than we are today. Unfortunately, I think that may be the reality of it.
Mike?
Yeah, I tend to agree. You know, it's Nest's vision to create the thoughtful experience. To your point, it's interfaceless, right? To your point, though, Frank, you still need control. And so we always kind of look at the world as alerts and notifications, and then action and control or command and control. And that's always going to be there. So I think different types of interfaces will be there, but the goal, at least what we're trying to create, is that seamless experience that you just described. You come and go, and your house revolves around you, right? And that's, you leave, you don't worry about locking the door, hop in your car and go. Not only that, but you're going to be able to take your preferences with you. The music that you were just listening to starts playing in the car, that was on your Sonos, right? You're going to see sectors, again, this is very early, but that's how I think, is the smart car will start talking with the smart city, urban infrastructure. They're all solving great problems on their own, and eventually we're going to see a little bit of a convergence and continuance across sectors. And again, 5 years, it's pretty aggressive to get to that point. But I think the home itself will have a combination of both adaptive, you just go about your business and things happen around it that are saving you time, money, and energy. And then to your point, you still have different interfaces for command and control.
Great. Okay, so it's now time for Q&A. Any questions?
Hi there. I'm Jonathan Livingston. I'm with Livingston Energy Innovations, but I'm not going to tax you to talk about energy tonight. What I do want to ask you, though, is our friends at Gartner Group developed the hype curve, which has become kind of a paradigm we think about a lot. And while I am excited about the enthusiasm across the panel, I'd like each of you to tell me, where is home automation, smart homes on the hype curve today? And hopefully you won't all have the same answer.
I would argue it's on it's still on the upswing of a periodic oscillation that will continue up and down, that there's not one finite curve, but it's a ride that will make us seasick every so often. That would be my vote. So we're still on the upswing before the latest round of disappointments and resets. What would you guys say?
I kind of put us in the realization of the challenges that we're facing is coming home, and we're probably maybe not in the public press, but as organizations, kind of over that initial
over the
blush
peak
of
and about to
excitement.
fall into that trough.
To a degree.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I think there's a lot of businesses that have been sold. A lot of businesses have exited. A lot of people have changed their strategies and how they're going to approach it. I think you're starting to see the downswing, the realization of what this will take.
I don't disagree. I may have sounded a little bit pessimistic even saying, gosh, in 5 years we could still be here. On the other side, working with the industry, I actually see a commitment to solve these things together. I actually see companies coming together. I see through open source projects where you've got big companies who go out and compete to sell product every day in the market, flying engineers all over the world to code together and write open source code that they can deploy in their products so they interoperate. That stuff is happening. The press doesn't write about it. We don't hear about it. But I think that realization is there that we have to solve these things together, and they're doing it. So I'm actually quite optimistic. I mean, there's still a bit of the hype curve there, right? I mean, it's the big, every year at every big consumer show, whether it's CES or whatever it may be, right? Oh, this is the year, and then people are disappointed, right? And we're disappointed yet again. But I think we're actually making a lot of progress. And to your point, we've all realized it, right? We know what the challenges are, and I think the focus is shifting to now let's solve those together.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I think we talked about the evolution process, right, of getting here and kind of how we got here. I think the big signals, when you see the big companies like Google acquiring Nest, HomeKit getting into the space, that's a pretty big signal that the hype curve has hit a tipping point. Now, to your point, I think we're experiencing the next level of challenges in that evolutionary process, right? But for the most part, we're seeing the connected devices individually and the value that they're bringing, certainly on the market and doing a pretty good job of that. And again, the signals by the big players getting involved, and certainly Qualcomm and Intel providing the technology that drives a lot of this is key component for that, so in their investment.
Great. Next question, please.
Hi. So it seems like there are a lot of companies that are trying to solve the interoperability problem at a hardware level, coming up with new radio approaches to having devices talk to each other. But it seems to me like that is a lost cause, because as we develop more and more products, it's going to be even harder to get all of the different people to work with everybody else. So wouldn't it be a better approach to do that interoperability matching sort of in the cloud and just get everything connected online as a first step, so that you can build services in the cloud that take care of all of that?
Yeah, I suppose maybe another way of asking it, isn't a better model just to have secure devices securely talking to the cloud, and you can mediate it up there, but actually all you need is the dial tone from your home broadband connection?
It breaks down. I mean, it breaks down. We saw this at Revolve. Ideally, it'd be great to solve it with software only, but especially in the cloud around latency. We have an expectation you turn on a light, it comes on instantly, right? WAN down situations, you lose your internet. What happens in those situations? So it's the hops and the skips and the jumps to the cloud are really, in latency would be a big issue, just around meeting a very high expectation by the consumer.
And I think that's the model that we've started with, right? I mean, everybody has looked at the cloud and said the cloud can solve all of these problems, do everything in the cloud. Let all of this integration interoperability happen in the cloud. And I think for some of the reasons that Mike just outlined, that doesn't solve everything, right? There is a mix and a balance. I think, from an open source project perspective, the AllSeen Alliance I think we've really said, look, let's find the commonality, right? Let's work together to solve those issues around discovery and connectivity. None of us are going out and making money because our device discovers and connects. It's what we do on top of it. So let's solve that. There's a cloud element, but let's bring that software into every device. And if we can bring that common layer into every device, then we can go off and do great things. And I think, from an open source project perspective, the AllSeen Alliance, that's really the way that we think it needs to be addressed. And we're very encouraged by the growth in memberships and companies and people coming together. And that feeds on itself. And it's about ecosystem at the end of the day, right? You need devices. To Mike's point earlier, if all you have is one connected device in your home, well, there's less value from it, right? When I have 10, all of a sudden, wow, it's more. When I get to 100, it's even more. So if we can build a large ecosystem of manufacturers that speak a common language, we think that's really critical, and it's being on the device itself, not just managed through the cloud.
Some level of interoperability, you could argue, is better suited in the cloud, but there will, I think, always be a need for local interoperability. And eventually, there's a tipping point where there's enough coalescence around certain protocols that it wouldn't, at least in our view, be a lost cause to continue to drive towards that consistency. I think as people start to realize that there's probably not viable business models in owning what radio protocol that you're doing, that it really is more for bringing in an aggregate ecosystem, then you'll see less differentiation.
Great. Next question.
Philip Skogstad, SAP. Thank you. Great talk. One comment and one question. Comment, you mentioned earlier the challenge around onboarding of new devices. The most beautiful way I've seen that being solved recently was on my new sprinkler controller. It's a technology called Blink. What it is, you on your iPhone punch in your Wi-Fi name, your password, and so on. Hold it up to the device. There's a photo sensor, and your screen just flashes the information and it reads it. It worked beautifully. Of all the onboarding scenarios from a consumer perspective, I loved it. Question. We've talked a lot about the technology challenges, including security. How about privacy? We got on the identity topic, what if you lose your phone? But I've recently had a colleague of mine, he had his Samsung TV connected to the internet and was watching the traffic, and then saw what all gets pumped to South Korea and just pulled the network plug on it. He was like, this is freaking me out. And I'm wondering, where do you see that? And it's maybe one of the challenges that we're going to see in the hype cycle. One of the big hitting the wall challenge is going to be privacy as these stories come up. We just saw it in the car industry, Chrysler having some challenges. where do you see that heading?
So maybe Mike, maybe you take that because you've been, with Nest for quite some time. You've been amassing all this consumer data.
Yeah, the first thing that needs to be stated is we take security and privacy extremely serious, right? And we feel and we treat that we are an invited guest into the home. And like any good guest, you need to behave, and if you don't, you'll be kicked out. And we really feel that that's a sacred relationship. So with that premise, we have a few tenets, right, that we live by. The first thing is transparency, is being very upfront about what data you collect and what you do with it. The second thing is easily enable the consumer to opt out at any time. Don't make it difficult. They should literally hit an X and it's done, not go through, not call the service center and try to get them. And when we do a partner connection, by the way, so any partner product, be it Whirlpool or Philips Hue or somebody that connects with that, and there's any data that's exchanged, again, we require the partner app to list what data is being shared, what the benefit for the consumer will receive, and again, in their app and in our app, that connection can be terminated at any time. So again, I think those tenets. And I think we all realize there's value in sharing data, and we all have to, it's a very individual decision. I mean, Facebook knows a heck of a lot, but I'm willing to do that to get connected with family and friends, right? And we also forget, again, to your point, Frank, the old door lock, the mechanical door lock, or people driving by the mailbox stealing my mail. It's still an issue, right? And we still have put up with security and privacy breaches on that front.
It's generally one home and not a million at once.
No, that's true, and I don't want to downplay
There's a scale thing that's different.
Yeah. And we just do our best. And how? Through bank-level security, right? That's how we protect that data. And we also use something called OAuth 2. So when our partner app asks for Nest credentials, it's never stored on the partner's servers, ever. It's a discrete tunnel through a third party using OAuth 2 that is very secure and doesn't store any of the Nest credentials. So again, we do the best we possibly can.
I want to add one tidbit to that and come back with something for you, because with Samsung, the reason that they're recording audio and sending it to Korea is because they put voice recognition in the product. And then in some cases, they're also doing video because now they're trying to do gesture recognition. But the problem is whoever set that product up was the person who sort of might have gone through whatever transparent and opt-in thing. And then another person walks up who doesn't know that. And I've yet to see in the industry something that enables each person who sort of enters the scene and interacts to then be disclosed and choose, right? And so I think that's a challenge the industry hasn't figured out yet, the difference between the person who sets it up and then the ongoing fact of the changing number of people who are interacting. And I'm curious if any of you have had any more thoughts on that.
Well, I think privacy and security, those fundamentally we have to address. And I think we're all looking at doing it in different ways. We all recognize it. And the burden's always on us, right? And by us, I mean the product manufacturers and everything. But how many of you go download an application and you never look at what privileges it asks for, what information it collects? You click on it, you click on it, you click on it, right? So it's incumbent on us as consumers, right? We want all of these things, but we also have to be aware of what we're giving. And we don't do that. So from a company perspective, I absolutely agree. And we spend a lot of time, both as an open source project, but Qualcomm as a company, focusing on how do we make things secure and how do we protect privacy. But if the consumer doesn't care, they're only going to complain at the end of the day, right? And they don't care, and most of us don't care. And so we have to be more mindful.
Well, security, we always use security and privacy, and we say the same, they're related, but security will always be a little bit behind, and we always have to be fighting that war. I mean, that one is absolutely foundational. You need to have the data be as secure as it possibly can. On privacy, it's a little bit more of a currency because, like we were talking about before, the reality is, as much as I maybe don't want Google to know everything that I'm doing, their products and services get better the more I let them know. And frankly, I've made the trade-off. I know that they're watching a bunch of things that I'm doing, and yet by doing so, I'm allowing them to provide me with better and better service. But I'm doing that fully aware. That's the transparency. But that's the service I'm seeking, and my currency is that privacy.
Yeah, I mean, you've seen that with like Google Photos, the amazing stuff that they're surfacing photos and animations from 10 years ago. So I think that's absolutely valid. Frank, you want to add something?
Well, what I was thinking about is in iOS, for example, you can go and drill in and see each individual app and what you've decided to let it do or not. But the industry has yet to create a central store or place where you could audit my total transparent, exposure, let's say. Now, I've seen a little bit like this in the browser where I don't think it's Ghostery. I'm not going to remember, but it was a cool little plugin for Chrome that effectively would audit my privacy and security settings across the social networks, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and guide me and advise me. So even if I hadn't read all the stuff, it would sort of audit me and give me a way to do that. And I thought that was really cool, but I don't see the industry yet inventing a way to, for example, 5 years from now, audit my smart home and tell me not only all the objects I have, but all the ways in which I'm sharing out data and to whom it's been extended and what benefit it gives me, and sort of have a meta level of that conversation rather than one product, one TV, one thermostat at a time.
I think you might not see that, Frank. That's hard.
It's very
not
hard.
Easy to do. That's why. Now,
yeah,
I'll tell you,
absolutely.
in the AllSeen Alliance, there is a group of many companies, big global leaders and enterprise and everything, that focus solely on security, but not just the security, but the frameworks that consumers interact with, right? Because if you make security complex, nobody will use it,
That's right.
And so it's a balance between how do you solve a really, really difficult
Yes.
problem, but do it in a way that's intuitive and usable,
Yes.
right, and manageable. And
It's
not
interesting.
easy.
I mean, if you look at where we are today, I mean, if you ask someone what are the devices connected to your home network, most people wouldn't have the first clue on figuring out all of them.
Right.
So, okay, next question.
Hi, my name is Suresh. I'd like the panel's views on some of the areas that they did not touch upon. And these are fundamental things that you see in a home. For example, health going beyond fitness, support for disabilities, and how do you really enable people to have a good quality of life, if they have disabilities, whether it's, age-related or non-age-related. I didn't see the panel touch upon entertainment, and you see most homes are actually fully connected on that front. Also, there could be a million other things that help improve visibility of the home's quality. It could be, is the corner of your house settling? Is a tornado going to hit you? There are a million other things that you could provide information. Yeah. I think of those things as a true connected home. What are the panel's views on that?
Yeah, can I just say, so we purposefully stayed away from entertainment because it's such a huge topic that we'd have run out of time completely. But Frank, you mentioned at the start many of the use cases. Let's touch on that health and well-being.
Yeah.
And I also think that point about disability is a really interesting one.
Well, I thought there were two different dimensions. One was sort of health and wellness care of yourself. And I've sort of excluded in the connected home the true medical care, which will also extend into this space. So there's a couple of different dimensions. And then the other one that I think about is sort of the assisted care. I mean, the most common one of our aging parents. But it could also be, an adult that needs extra supervision or what have you. And there seems to be a lot of potential in the technologies that are being developed. Unobtrusive things like basically motion sensors, and you see this from. There's a company that has the funny name Mother for what they do, but I'm going to get it wrong. It's in the report I published on Monday. But they have give you little sensors that you can put on the refrigerator and on the bathroom door that basically are just enough to know if someone's gotten up and is inactive in the house, but really doesn't record enough intrusive information about them, so it doesn't have a video camera or something like that. So I think there's significant potential for those kind of assistive and monitoring for dependence. And if you flip it around on the wellness side of things, the Withings Wi-Fi bathroom scale is an example. I mean, the connected toothbrushes aren't that sophisticated yet. The really funny one is the Toto toilets that watch your output and maybe send you health alerts about changes in the quality of your output and things that you should know about. So there is a lot of potential for a lot of wellness monitoring. And in terms of assistance with disabilities, I feel like a lot of that is maybe related to but distinct from what we see around the smart home but there's certainly potential for that as well.
Mike, maybe you can talk about accessibility. I mean, am I going to be able to speak to Google now? And how are you guys looking at controlling the smart home via different methods?
It's through partnerships, right? So we certainly tackle certain categories, reinvent these unloved products, but in very specific categories that haven't received a ton of attention over years. But you talk about certain areas of well-being, of access points, and it's through, again, use cases and working with them. And it's evolutionary in nature. It's not. There are some companies specifically that are tackling this with the intent for independent care or. But I don't think we address it head on. I think we adapt based on partnering use cases,
right,
and then try to surface those back to the consumer, in useful and meaningful ways.
Ooh, one of the companies I'd call out briefly is OnCall, ONKOL, and it's a combination of some of this smart home stuff, but for assisted living, helping someone. But one of the intriguing features is you run the phone line through it, and then it records the caller ID and matches that against the fraud database. And so you can see if the parent whom you're trying to assist is getting called by known fraud phone numbers, and therefore can check and say, hey, did somebody today pitch you on, call you about an IRS payment? Let's talk about that.
So this is a really interesting use case, right? Because you've introduced the concept of clusters and talked about clusters.
Right.
And healthcare could be a vertical or a cluster, but I want to tie it back to the bigger ecosystem in the house. And this is a really great example. And this is a business that actually Qualcomm is in. And we have a very big business around mobile health. And one of the things that we showed at CES this past year with many of the partners who were integrating actually AllJoin, which is the technology platform from the AllSeen Alliance, is that, there's a viable business to be made here. And at the end of the day, we want to be able to build businesses and create economic value.
Right.
And by having a pillbox that can send notification and events that speaks the same protocol that my TV understands and other devices understand, all of a sudden, if my pillbox isn't open and it ties back into my health provider gateway, they say, oh, for 3 days, Matt's pillbox hasn't opened. And maybe a notification or a human-to-machine message comes up on my TV for me to read. And if I don't respond to that and go open my pillbox, and they see that, they can escalate, and maybe they.
You mean deny me my soap operas?
Speakers, right? But it's that ecosystem and leveraging the functionality of those various devices. And if my connected heart rate monitor, they may say, Matt, you need to come in, right? And that may come through the speakers if I'm not responding in my home. And those are services that add value, and it's very specific to a cluster. But the cluster can leverage the connectivity across the home. To address and enable that model. So it's a great use case.
That's great. Well, Frank, Larry, Matt, and Mike, really appreciate all of your thoughts today. I mean, it's just hearing you speak. You think the smart home's this, but actually, it's there's so much more to it. There's so much complexity technically. There's so much opportunity, and I think we're all just really excited by the opportunity. And I can't wait to see what all of you are going to be bringing to the market in the next few years. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much from our audience and the Churchill Club. As a small gesture of our thanks, we have for you the Churchill Club speaker T-shirt.
All right.
Robin, you're going to need a special drawer for those. A recording of this program will be available on our YouTube channel within a day or so, and there you will find recordings of most of our other programs as well. Hope that you find that to be a useful resource. Thank you again to Accenture, and you have been a wonderful audience. Thank you so much. See you next time. Good night.